The late 19th century Alaskan cold was a biting blade, cutting through skin and bone. In the small, isolated settlement of Whisper Creek, life was a daily struggle, a constant battle against the relentless wilderness. Sarah, an 18-year-old with a resilient spirit, was accustomed to hardship, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight in the town's center. Tied to a wooden post, her brown hair whipped by the gusting wind, she shivered, not just from the cold, but from profound humiliation. Her father, a man broken by debt and drink, had sold her in a public auction. Snow fell in swirling eddies, obscuring the landscape and the faces of the men who appraised her like cattle. The auctioneer, a corpulent man with a hoarse voice, shouted bids, his cries nearly swallowed by the howling blizzard that intensified with each passing moment. Despair was a cold ache in her chest. She closed her eyes, wishing the darkness of the winter would simply carry her away. A single, firm bid rang out, silencing the murmurs. When Sarah opened her eyes, she saw a tall, rugged figure approaching. It was Caleb, the trapper, a man of few words, known for his skill with a rifle and his unwavering solitude. He wore a coat of bearskin and a wool hat that hid most of his face, save for the piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through her. The silence that followed his offer was heavy, broken only by the wind. The auctioneer, taken aback, declared the bid the winner. Sarah felt her stomach knot. What did he want with her? Caleb walked up to the post, untied the ropes that bound her, and with a simple, unexpected gesture, threw his own jacket over her shoulders. "Let's go," he said, his voice low and calm. The shock and relief hit her with the force of a punch. He didn't drag her, didn't touch her in any invasive way. He simply guided her away from the square, away from the curious stares. The bearskin jacket smelled of wood smoke and the forest, a warm, protective scent that contrasted sharply with the frigid air. They walked toward the forest, toward his cabin, without a word. The silence was filled only with the sound of their footsteps on the snow and the wind's mournful howl. For Sarah, that walk was a journey into the unknown. The vast, dark forest seemed to swallow the remaining light, and every step took her closer to an uncertain future. She felt a glimmer of hope, but the fear of what awaited her was a heavy shroud. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss the rest of this thrilling story. Stepping into the cabin, the warmth of the fireplace enveloped her, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. Caleb's cabin was simple, yet surprisingly clean. Animal hides were spread on the floor, a rustic table stood in the center, and the fireplace cast dancing shadows on the wooden walls. Caleb gestured for her to sit on a stool near the fire. "Here, for the cold," he said, extending a metal cup with a hot, steaming liquid. It was a herbal tea, and the aroma was instantly comforting. She held the cup with both hands, feeling the pleasant heat soothe her stiff fingers. "I bought you to give you your freedom," he said abruptly, breaking the silence. His voice was soft and gruff yet firm. Sarah nearly choked on her tea, her mind reeling. "What?" "You are free to go. I paid your father's debt. You owe me nothing." He sat down in a chair opposite her, and the firelight illuminated his face, revealing a sparse beard and eyes that, though tired, held a flicker of honesty. The shock and disbelief prevented her from speaking for a moment. Why would he do that? Where would she go? Freedom was a terrifying concept now. She had nowhere to go, no home, no family, in a desolate land. The blizzard outside was a white wall of violence, and the darkness was swallowing the landscape. She looked at him, at the man who had bought her only to set her free. I have nowhere to go," she whispered, her voice frail. Caleb looked at her with a compassion she hadn't expected. "You can stay here for now, until the storm passes. Then you can decide." The offer was a relief, but the uncertainty still haunted her. She couldn't trust him, could she? Life had taught her not to trust anyone. Night fell completely, and the wind howled like a lonely wolf, rattling against the wooden walls of the cabin. Sarah huddled near the fire, watching Caleb clean his rifle with precise, careful movements. The tension of the situation prevented her from relaxing. The silence was broken only by the crackle of the wood in the fireplace and the sound of the wind. She was in a safe place, but the uncertainty of the future was a weight on her shoulders. When sleep finally overcame her, she lay on a pile of animal hides, the warmth of the fire embracing her and the sound of the wind as her lullaby. Days turned into weeks. The blizzard continued, isolating them from the outside world. Sarah, little by little, began to understand Caleb's solitary life. He was a man of habit, waking early to check traps, hunt and chop wood. He didn't speak much, but his actions spoke volumes. He always left the best part of the food for her, warmed the cabin before she woke, and one afternoon brought out a book of tales he had kept for years. They spent the evenings reading by the fireplace. Sarah would read to him, and he would listen intently, his blue eyes reflecting the flames. Sarah's initial suspicion began to dissolve. She saw in Caleb not a predator, but a protector. He taught her how to track animals in the snow, how to prepare hides, and how to shoot a rifle. He was a patient teacher, and she was an eager student. Fear was replaced by a sense of security. She was at peace. The routine, once imposed, became something natural and even comforting. Caleb's cabin, once a refuge from an uncertain fate, became a home. The loneliness that had once defined them began to fade. One afternoon, while clearing snow from the roof, Sarah slipped and fell, twisting her ankle. The pain was sharp and throbbing. Caleb carried her inside the cabin with the same ease with which he carried a log. He examined her ankle, his large hand gentle. "It's not broken, but it will hurt for a while," he said. He bandaged her ankle with strips of cloth, and Sarah felt strangely vulnerable yet protected. In that moment, she realized that the freedom he had given her was not just physical, but emotional. He had freed her from fear and distrust. Time passed, and the blizzard finally gave way. The sky opened up in a clear blue, and the sun shone, reflecting off the snow, blinding them for a moment. It was time for her to leave. The decision, which had once seemed the only way out, was now difficult. They sat near the fireplace, in the silence that had become familiar. Sarah looked at Caleb, at the blue eyes that had freed her. I don't want to go," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Caleb looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something more than just kindness in his eyes. The arrival of a man named Elias shattered their fragile peace. He was the one her father was indebted to, a ruthless, ambitious trapper who saw Sarah as property and a means to an end. Elias, having heard rumors of her whereabouts, had tracked her to Caleb's cabin. He stood at the door, a sinister smile on his face, his small, cruel eyes scanning the interior. "Well, well, look what we have here. The little prize has found a new owner," he sneered, his voice an oily rasp. He demanded that Caleb hand her over, claiming that a trapper's debt was a trapper's debt, and that Sarah was still his to claim. Caleb stepped forward, a silent, imposing figure. He didn't raise his voice, but his presence was a wall of steel. "She's not a possession, she's free," he stated, his voice a low rumble. Elias laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Freedom costs, and this little bird's freedom cost me plenty. Hand her over, or there will be trouble." The air in the cabin grew thick with tension. Sarah stood behind Caleb, her heart pounding. She knew Elias was dangerous. He was a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. Caleb's eyes narrowed, a silent warning. "Leave now, Elias. This is your only chance." Elias's smile vanished, replaced by a scowl. He drew a hunting knife, the blade glinting ominously in the firelight. "I'm not leaving without what's mine." The standoff was tense, a silent battle of wills. Sarah knew she had to do something. She grabbed Caleb's rifle, the one he had taught her to use, and pointed it at Elias. The weight of it was heavy, but her hands were steady. "Leave," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Elias's cruel eyes widened in surprise, not at the rifle, but at the girl's defiance. He knew he had underestimated them. The threat of a confrontation, a real one, made him hesitate. He took a step back, still scowling. "This isn't over," he snarled, before turning and disappearing back into the blinding whiteness of the snowstorm. They were alone again, but the calm was gone. The threat was still out there, lurking in the shadows of the forest. The outside world had found them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss the rest of this thrilling story. Elias's threat hung in the air like the cold. He had returned to Whisper Creek, but Caleb knew he wouldn't stay there. He would gather other men, maybe the ones who had bid on Sarah, and return to claim his property. "We need to go," Caleb said, his voice flat. Sarah nodded, already preparing. They packed what they could: dried meat, blankets, a small hunting knife, and a few essentials. The cabin, their sanctuary, had become a cage. The wilderness, their home, was now a potential hiding place. They left the warmth of the fireplace and stepped back into the bitter cold, the silence of the forest broken only by the crunch of their snowshoes. They traveled north, deeper into the untouched wilderness, where few men dared to venture. Caleb moved with an almost supernatural quietness, his knowledge of the land unparalleled. He taught Sarah to read the snow for tracks, to spot hidden game trails, and to find shelter in rock formations. They were a team, their movements synchronized, their goals aligned. The cold was a constant companion, but the danger of Elias and his men was a more immediate threat. They knew he would follow, relentless in his pursuit. One night, huddled around a small fire in a makeshift lean-to, they heard the distant cry of a wolf. It was a haunting sound, but it wasn't a wolf. It was a signal. "They're close," Caleb whispered. He extinguished the fire and they melted into the shadows of the trees. Their breath was a white cloud in the freezing air. They moved silently, a ghost in the vast white landscape. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, a drumbeat of fear and adrenaline. She didn't feel the cold anymore. All she felt was a heightened sense of awareness, her every nerve on edge. As they crept through the frozen trees, they saw a lantern light flicker in the distance. Elias and his men had stopped to make camp. They were so close. Caleb looked at Sarah, his eyes a steel blue in the moonlight. "We'll wait until they're asleep, then we'll take their supplies and their horses," he whispered. "Without their supplies, they can't follow us far. The wilderness will take care of them." It was a ruthless plan, but survival in the wild was a ruthless game. They waited in the cold, a silent vigil, the bond between them strengthening with every frozen breath. Under the pale light of the moon, Caleb and Sarah executed their plan with chilling efficiency. They moved like shadows, their footsteps muffled by the soft snow. While Elias and his men slept soundly, exhausted by their journey, Caleb and Sarah quietly took their provisions, leaving just enough to sustain them for a day or two. More importantly, they led the horses away and set them free, deep in the woods, scattering their trail in the process. The men would wake up to a meager meal and no means of long-distance pursuit. The cold and the unforgiving terrain would be their greatest adversaries now. They moved on, putting as much distance as they could between themselves and their pursuers. As dawn broke, the forest was painted in a gentle pink and orange hue, and a sense of relief washed over them. The immediate danger was gone. They had outsmarted their enemies, not with violence, but with wit and knowledge of the land. Sarah looked at Caleb, and a silent understanding passed between them. Their survival wasn't a matter of luck. It was a testament to their teamwork and his unwavering determination. They found a new, hidden place to set up a temporary camp, a small, rocky outcrop with a natural cave that was protected from the wind. It was a perfect, secluded spot. As they built a fire, the tension that had been a constant companion began to dissipate. Sarah found herself looking at Caleb with a newfound admiration. He was more than a hunter. He was a master of his environment, a man who lived in harmony with the brutal, beautiful world around him. His quiet strength and his unwavering protection had given her not only physical safety, but a deep sense of security. They sat by the fire, the silence between them no longer filled with anticipation or fear, but with a comfortable ease. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, "for everything." He simply nodded, his eyes on the fire. But then he turned to her, and for the first time he smiled. It was a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes, and it transformed his rugged face. In that moment, surrounded by the vastness of the Alaskan wilderness, Sarah knew she had found something more than just a rescuer. She had found a partner. The cold was outside, but inside, a warmth had started to grow. With the threat of Elias finally gone, they settled into a rhythm of life that was both simple and profound. The days were spent hunting, preparing food, and fortifying their camp. The nights were spent by the fire, their conversations growing longer and more intimate. One night, under a sky ablaze with the northern lights, Sarah asked Caleb about his past. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke, his voice quiet. He told her about his family, a wife and a young son, who had succumbed to a fever years ago. He had tried to save them, but the nearest settlement was too far and the snow was too deep. The grief had consumed him, and he had retreated into the wilderness, seeking solace in solitude. Sarah's heart ached for him. She reached out and placed her hand on his, a gesture of silent comfort. He didn't pull away. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw not just grief, but a deep, long-held loneliness. I thought I couldn't feel that kind of loss again," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "But when I saw you at the auction, I couldn't just stand by." Sarah's own past, the betrayal and the humiliation, seemed insignificant in the face of his pain. She understood now. He hadn't just bought her freedom, he had saved her. And in doing so, he had saved himself from a lifetime of silent grief. She told him about her own past, her father's failures, and the slow, grinding poverty that had led to her being sold. They were two broken pieces, finding a sense of wholeness in each other's company. The air between them hummed with unspoken emotions. The northern lights danced above them, a silent, breathtaking spectacle. Caleb slowly lifted his hand, cupping her cheek. His touch was hesitant, gentle. "I never thought I'd find this," he said, his voice a low whisper. Sarah leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. In that moment, she knew she was home, not in a place, but with a person. She was free, and she was in love. Caleb leaned in and kissed her, a tender, unspoken promise. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss the rest of this thrilling story. The winter finally broke. The snow began to melt, revealing the vibrant green of the forest floor. The world came alive again, and with it, the reality of Sarah's situation returned. The trail back to Whisper Creek was now passable. The freedom Caleb had given her was now a choice she had to make. She was no longer bound by debt or circumstance, but by a powerful, unspoken love. The conflict wasn't with Elias anymore, it was within herself. Should she go? Should she stay? Caleb noticed her quiet contemplation. He didn't press her, didn't try to influence her decision. He respected her choice, even if it meant he would lose her. He continued his daily routine, but a quiet sadness hung around him. He knew that the world was calling to her, a world of possibilities and new beginnings, a world he had abandoned long ago. He was a man of the wilderness, and he had no right to hold her captive, not even with love. One afternoon, as she was mending his coat, she looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the depth of his feelings for her. He was a simple man, but his love was profound. She thought of a life back in the settlement, perhaps finding work, building her own life, but the image was hollow. The only life she wanted was with him, in this cabin, in this harsh, beautiful world that they had made their own. She knew what she had to do. The decision was no longer a matter of fear, but of love. That evening she sat by the fire, watching him clean his rifle. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice steady. He stopped, his movements frozen. He looked at her, his eyes wide with surprise and a hint of something she couldn't quite decipher. "You're free, Sarah. You should go," he said, his voice strained. "I am free, Caleb," she said, her voice strong. "And I'm choosing to stay with you." A wave of relief washed over his face, replaced by a deep, powerful emotion. It was the first time she saw him truly vulnerable, truly open. He put down his rifle and came to her, taking her hands in his. The first signs of spring brought a terrible accident. Caleb was out checking traps, and Sarah was working in the garden, planting seeds. She heard a cry of pain, sharp and immediate, from the direction of the woods. Dropping everything, her heart pounding, she ran toward the sound. She found Caleb pinned under a large fallen tree branch. He had been checking a trap when a gust of wind had snapped a weakened branch, sending it crashing down on his leg. He was in agony, his face pale with pain. The weight of the branch was immense, and Sarah knew she couldn't lift it alone. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she remembered Caleb's lessons: stay calm, assess the situation, and act. She used a small log as a lever, prying the branch up just enough for him to pull his leg free. She bandaged his badly broken leg, using a piece of cloth from his shirt. He was losing blood, and she knew she had to get him back to the cabin. She dragged him, inch by agonizing inch, through the muddy, thawing ground. The journey was a brutal test of her strength and will. She had to use all the skills he had taught her, navigating the tricky terrain, keeping him warm, and constantly encouraging him. "We're almost there, Caleb. Just a little further," she would whisper, though her own strength was failing. The roles were reversed now. He was the one in need, and she was the one who had to save him. She was no longer the helpless girl from the auction block. She was a survivor, a protector. Finally, she managed to get him back to the cabin. She laid him by the fire, covered him with blankets, and tended to his wound, using what little knowledge she had of herbal remedies to soothe the pain. He was weak and delirious with fever, but he was alive. As he lay there, his quiet strength replaced by a helpless vulnerability, Sarah realized the full circle of their journey. He had saved her, and now, by using his own lessons, she had saved him. Their bond was forged not just in love, but in a shared battle for survival. For weeks, Sarah became Caleb's sole caretaker. She changed his bandages, fed him broth, and used a poultice of local herbs to bring down his fever. She barely slept, her exhaustion overshadowed by her determination to see him heal. He was a stubborn patient, but he was also a man who trusted her completely. He watched her, his eyes filled with a quiet admiration. The silent hunter was now the one being cared for, and he found a deep comfort in her devotion. As the weeks passed, Caleb's fever finally broke and his leg began to heal. He was still weak, but he was on the mend. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the cabin window, he sat up for the first time. "You saved me, Sarah," he said, his voice hoarse. "You didn't have to." Sarah sat by his side, her hand in his. "I didn't have to," she said. "I wanted to." He squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement of the depth of her love. They talked about the future, no longer as a possibility, but as a certainty. Caleb, once a man of solitude, now wanted to build a life with her, right here, in this cabin that had become their home. They would raise a family, they decided, and they would teach their children the ways of the land, the lessons of survival and resilience. Their love story wasn't a fairy tale of a knight and a princess. It was a rugged, real tale of two broken people who had found each other in the harsh, unforgiving wilderness of Alaska and had, against all odds, built a home. Years later, a new, small cabin would stand beside Caleb's original one, a testament to their love and their life together. Their children would run through the fields, their laughter echoing through the trees. Sarah would watch them, her heart full, her hand in Caleb's. She would look at him, at the quiet, gentle man who had bought her freedom and, in doing so, had given her a life. He had been the hunter, but she had been the one to find the greatest treasure, a love as enduring as the Alaskan snow and as warm as the fire in their home. The auction was just a memory, a distant past, but the love that grew from it was their living, breathing legacy. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss the final chapter of this emotional journey.